Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, last night we played session 9 of The Veil. A little over a year ago, Runesinger and Same Old G and myself got together and had an agreement that we were going to learn this game, The Veil by Sam Joko Publishing. That we were going to play 9 sessions and we were going to co-GM, or in this case MC, the game. And so each one of us was going to GM or MC 3 sessions and then pass the baton on to the next one. G was going to do the first 3 sessions, I was going to do the second, and Anthony was going to do the last 3. And so that's what we finally completed. And so, as is our tradition, I was going to make a reflections video, as all of we are. And then I might make another reflections video about the entire experience, but this has been a long, drawn-out experiment, which has been a lot of fun. It's kind of bittersweet. You know, I'm glad it's over in some regards, but I'm also sad to see it go. But I want to talk a little bit about what happened during the session. I actually made a video last night directly after the session, which came out really, really well, but the volume was way too quiet, and I was unable to salvage it using something like Windows Movie Maker, the editor. So if anybody knows of some better software that's free, let me know. Because I was using my newer iPad, which is it's a 6th generation. I think the mic might be in the back or something, because it just came out really muffled and quiet, which is unusual. That this old clunky iPad does better. But this video has nothing to do with my technological misadventures now, does it? A lot of neat things came out of this experiment. And if you've never sat down with a group of people and decided, let's learn this game together, you know, I recommend doing that, because it can be a really interesting experience, especially one that's a little bit tough to learn, that requires a little bit more thought. Although there's a lot to be said for learning a game that's easy to learn with your friends as well. It took 3 people with some strong personalities. We do not always mesh 100% in our approach to games, and that was interesting in and of itself. The times that we, and also 3 people that were willing to talk about the experience afterwards. You know, what do we experience? What were our impressions? What went well for us? What didn't go so well for us? Where do we find that the system might be fighting us? Where we might be doing things wrong ourselves? Where we felt that each other, maybe we were, you know, one of the other guys was overstepping their bounds or wasn't doing something quite right. So it was a really interesting experiment in a lot of regards. So I look forward to more of those. You know, the interesting things that happened this last session was very, very satisfying. I liked the way all the things kind of tied together, and the themes that came up in this game. You know, some of them were intentional, but some of them seemed to be rather emergent. I remember talking to G before session 9 started, while Anthony was walking, you know, one of his 500 dogs. He doesn't have 500, I think it's 5 or 6. But we were talking about the idea that this overwhelming theme of powerlessness kept on coming up for us. And it's very cyberpunk. But the idea that, you know, it was almost like jumping into a pond and looking around and there's no ripples. That even though our characters, you know, were competent to a certain degree, and that's the way those characters are designed, you know, and like as many characters are in PBTA games, we really just were not having a big effect on environment, and that could just make you feel very small and very insignificant. And that theme kind of came up over and over and over again. But there were lots of emergent themes, you know, to me that kept on coming up. The session was interesting in the regards that our characters spent almost no time together. They had kind of parted ways at the end of session 8, and so Anthony juggled back and forth between these 2 different things that were happening. Jorn's time in the session was full of a lot of action. You know, he moved about this level 4 that we were now found ourselves in. He found that he couldn't act the way he did in the sprawl in level 4, and a lot of what happened to him was just kind of like this mismatch where he simply didn't belong there. He didn't know how to behave in level 4, and I was thinking about it as I'm watching G, because this game was really great that I got to watch G and his character play for large chunks of time, then go back and play my character. And, you know, he found in some cases the price of admission to this higher strata of society was conformity. And Jorn simply was unable to conform. He was unable to be a good little street preacher. And as a result, he incurred all sorts of consequences, you know, from the authorities, from the people there that looked like they were about to save him, but really just wanted him for his assets. A lot of these things brought on, in some cases, by what the fiction would demand. You go and jump in a fountain in a posh level of society and start preaching and strip your clothes off. Of course, the authorities are going to come and try to beat you down. But when you ask for help, some of the consequences were brought on by the move itself and the complications that arose, due to the way he rolled. It's really, really satisfying how the fiction kind of brought that together. In the meantime, Tess spent most of the session, I didn't realize how long it was, having in the Veil, having this kind of virtual reality conversation with the Veil itself. And Tess is an android, and she got a conversation with what she has decided would be her mother. And that was really, really neat and compelling. In fact, it was funny because G was talking about it afterwards, because we do have a section of the Anthony's video, which is up right now. I believe they're both uploading their own reflections videos. That G mentioned that, hey, my session was full of all this action, and I did these things, and your character, I felt bad because they sat around. Not that he felt bad, but it was very different. And to me, my take on it was a lot different. Tess, because she's this kind of built-for-action android, when she does these things which are more like flashy, it's not boring, but that's not the real meat and potatoes of the Veil for me, at least with that character. It was those discussions she had with other characters, with the other people, trying to figure out who she was. A lot of Tess's, what emerged as her story, for lack of a better word, was her awakening, trying to figure out who she was, what humanity was, where she fit in, did she fit in, did she want to fit in, what was she actually created for. And so a lot of these philosophical discussions, or just her barraging people with questions, being asked questions herself, that was really, really satisfying and compelling for me. So this conversation that Anthony and I had as Tess and the Veil for quite some time, that was a lot of fun. And that's one of the neat things about science fiction, is that you can kind of amp everything up to 11. You take the gloves off, you don't have to worry about what's plausible, what's actually possible. And so you get to examine all of these deep questions about the human condition and philosophy and what have you. The other thing I noticed, and I got a chance to talk about today, with some friends in a different venue, was the idea that, in some role-playing game sessions, there's a lot of examination of yourself, about your own views, about your own beliefs. And there was this moment, I got a chance to talk to Anthony this morning, my morning, and we talked a little bit about how the session went, and the idea that there was this point. There are spoilers here, so sorry. If you want to go watch Anthony's session and watch us play the Veil, stop and go watch that. But there were these moments where we realized all of a sudden that the Veil was kind of involved in this other theme, because another theme that showed up over and over in the game was kind of bringing order out of chaos. The idea that humanity is this just unruly mess, this sprawl of people on all strata that do horrible things to each other. And there needs to be some kind of unification. In fact, Jorn, the street preacher, he preached the unified. He preached the unification of all people. We are all part of the one. And it was neat how what the characters were doing, what each player brought to the table, and the GM brought to the table, started to all of a sudden coalesce into this idea. But this theme kept on emerging over and over again. So the Veil is letting Tess know that, hey, I want to link with everybody else. You need to help me, or I would like you to help me, of your own free will, to link with these people, show them what they need to do, because without a shepherd, they're lost. And there was a lot of what showed up in the sessions over and over again for me was, do the ends justify the means? Does this noble, lofty goal of peace and order and tranquility, does it justify the means by which it's brought about? Is it justified by the way Jorn and the street preaching and his use of the psychedelic drug and pretty much ignoring reality and going into the stupor? Does that justify those sort of means? Does the artificial creation of order by the police and by brutality and by, once again, forcing you into conformity, you simply don't do that on level 4. Does that justify those ends? Just justify those sort of means? And in the case of the Veil, because essentially what the Veil was doing was, it was actually a really kind of neat thing that Anthony brought in, and it was masterful the way he switched back and forth between us at just the right times. The idea that the Veil's MO, as I was able to discover near the end of the session, was it wasn't coercion. It was this rapid fire series of questions through new implants that were being put in people, where it asked them a series of questions about their life. It created this kind of moment of crisis, if you will. And at that point, they were they were instruments, or they were singers in need of a song, and they were sheep in need of a shepherd. And so there's this big amphitheater where these people have been gathered, and they're kind of singing this song together, the song of the unified, all plugged into the veil, all experiencing things as the one, not through the drug, but through the implant that the veil has given them. And there's this interesting moment or moments in the game, and I got to think about this a lot today. This is one of those things where all of a sudden we take a hard left turn into Ivan's psyche, which is one of the cool things that these games can do sometimes. And looking at Tess has this moment, and it's kind of, she has this moment of temptation, but then realizes that she is just not okay with the plan the veil has, even though she views the humans as lesser than her. The method was distasteful for her, because at one point, I think it was this pivotal point where the veil actually accuses her of some hubris, which she certainly had, and said that the instrument doesn't tell the musician what to play. The musician plays upon the instrument. She got called a toaster one more time, because that's what happened with Cadmus. Anthony's character would call her a toaster. Yorn constantly emphasized the fact that she was not human, she was an android. And now here the veil is telling her, you are but an instrument for my grand plan. And this was that moment of rejection. And I kind of smiled today. It was this Lucifer moment, where Tess became, in effect, Lucifer, rejecting, his father's plans, and say, that's really nice, Dad, but I think I'll do this instead. I quit this organization. Where Yorn, on the other hand, this street preacher, he becomes this reluctant messiah. Once again, the spoiler, where finally, what happened in this game, and I'm digressing, but I'm going to bring it back, I promise. What happened in this game, which was fascinating to me, was each of us went into this session with our own kind of agenda. I saw as Tess, where she was going, what she was going to try to do, because eventually her idea was to link with everybody as the veil had wanted her to, and then to jump from a vehicle, commit suicide in front of all of them, but allow them to experience that. Let them know this is what the veil has planned for your individuality, this kind of wake-up call. And that was what was going through her mind. She had made peace with the idea that's what she was going to do. In the meantime, G was going through, having Yorn go through the game with a different set of agendas. He began to mistrust the veil. He did not, that one moment where Tess and G got back together, he had wanted no part of that, and broke away from her. Anthony, I'm sure, was, like every MC in this game has done, was bringing, having reality react the way it would react based upon his understanding and retooling of the fiction of what was going on behind the scenes. Because one of the things that happened in this game was, as each MC passed the MC sheet, the information to the next one, it was with the understanding that you were free to tweak this, to change some things, that now the reality of this game world is in your hands to a certain extent. So I no longer know what's going on. And so there were these three converging forces where we didn't plan a story. We didn't plan for something to happen, but something emerged based upon the collision, the impact of all these various trajectories. And so the story, the final events that emerged were something much better, much more satisfying than I think any one of us could have imagined or have created. So there's this moment finally when Tess is thwarted over and over again. Cannot link up with people. The link's severed because Yorn finally goes up and it says to the crowd, you should unplug, and he rolls a sway move. This is, we got to engage with the mechanics several times during the session, and generally we did okay with them. We kind of had them. We didn't eschew the mechanics, but we knew they were there. We decided we were going to speak the moves' names and be really clear about our intentions and directions, and we had to stop a bunch of times and take a look at how are we going to handle this. And some of them went smoother than others. But there was this moment where, part of what happens in these games, which we did talk about a little bit, is that you succeed an awful lot. And so this requires a lot of thinking on your feet and creativity by the MC and by the player. Well, how does this actually turn out? So Yorn sways the crowd. He gets them to unplug. But he owes them something, and that's part of the complication that arose. And it was perfect. And Anthony just said, well, we need a leader. Lead us. So now no longer are they singers in need of this song that the veil is providing them. They're now sheep who demand a shepherd. And they all turn to this reluctant Messiah. And it's this life of Brian moment, as this crushing weight of the of the people descend upon Yorn and elevate him to this status that he did not want. And the curtain is going down on the session, and Tess just starts laughing at the absurdity of it all, not just of the tragedy of the human condition, but just the absurdity of everything that's going on. And to me, this was much more satisfying. And it was something that we created, but it was, in many cases, emergent. We had some intentions going into the session, or intentional themes, but these other themes that showed up, they were very emergent. And it got me thinking, how often when we play these games, we're playing our character, but how much of our own ourselves actually shows up as well. Like I was talking to Anthony about, which I said quite some time ago, and I don't think I ever finished the thought, was there's that moment where, is there this correlation between what my gut is telling me and my guy? What would my guy do? My gut and my guy. There's a correlation there. There's a video in there. I'm not sure which one of us will do it first. But I got to observe in myself those moments where I had one reaction to what the veil was saying, and Tess had a slightly different reaction. I understood and trusted that the veil's intentions were good, although misguided, but Tess was much more violently opposed to them. So it's kind of interesting to see that, where does she end and I begin and all that sort of thing. So that was a really, really neat thing that happened there. So I enjoyed the experiment. I think it comes with playing with good players, with being willing to just bring, your, not agendas, bring some stuff to the table, but then seeing what actually happens, being able to let go of what really happens in the fiction, play to find out. And we did run into some things that we talked a little bit about the idea that, like, in at least in my perspective, in something like PBTA games, the design of the moves is really important. How specific they are, not leaving too many loopholes. To me, one of my takeaways from playing the Veil, looking at some other PBTA games, is there's probably more to designing these games than meets the eye. And there's more care needed in designing moves and how the various moving parts of the game work. There's a lot of care also needed in the implementation of the moves as well. One of the things I noticed, because we talked a little bit about the characters sometimes not playing well together, and Yorn and Tess were pretty much diametrically opposed in a lot of ways, and I think she felt a little bad about us kind of splitting ways in the session, and the fact that he thwarted Tess at every turn during the end of the session, which I thought was great. But one of the things that happens, it's certainly in the Veil and in a lot of other PBTA games, is there's not a lot of room for supporting characters. The characters are all built in a rather strong manner, so that there isn't a lot of room in a fictional sense to become the supporting character to somebody else's Messiah or to somebody else's dying person with a lot of questions, or to somebody else's android that it's awakening. There are these very strong personalities kind of clashing with each other. So that was interesting as well. But overall, I enjoyed the session. I enjoyed the way the fiction went. I really loved watching G play Yorn. I think he enjoyed watching me play Tess as well. It was very satisfying from the sense of the fiction. And it was satisfying in the sense that I think we finally start to really find our way in playing Powered by the Apocalypse games again. So, like I said, it's bittersweet. It's nice to have brought some closure to it, but it's at the same time I'm kind of sad to see it go. And one of the things we did afterwards, we asked, Anthony asked, where do you see these characters? Will they meet again? Will they reconcile? And there was this interesting. Now that I made this video much longer than the last one. There's another interesting moment which I found very compelling. This non-player character, Todd, he needed a name because Tess asked him what his name was. He was simply driving a taxi, and she needed a taxi to take her to this amphitheater to go find Yorn and to do what the Veil wanted her to do. And she just asked the young man's name. And the young man treated her with respect. She was somebody that was coming out of level 4. She looked elegant. And she even asked, well, you can be my date for the night. Come on down, we'll crash the party. And he was quite taken with her. And her friends treated her, even though they were her friends, they treated her like a toaster, like a microwave, like somebody that was not human. And so much of this game, we were asking the question, what does it mean to be human? What's the nature of reality? What's the nature of existence? And by those closest to her, by her mother, the Veil, by by Cadmus, by Yorn, her closest friends, she was treated as something less than. And this young man, Todd, just treated her like a human being, like a woman, like somebody he was proud to be next to. And so I imagined, in this very noir way, you're kind of going off into the sunset and saying, what do you think's over the next corner? Why don't we get out of this city and find something else? I can imagine Todd going off with Tess in that way. And never being the wiser that, she's not physically, biologically human. But then again, what is human anyway? So, really fun time. Thanks for watching.